Hello and welcome to part 2 of Understanding Attachment Aware and Trauma Informed Practice in the Learning Environment. Let's talk about ACEs. These are known as Adverse Childhood Experiences. So what are Adverse Childhood Experiences? ACEs include any form of maltreatment, for example, any form of abuse such as physical or emotional or sexual abuse. It could be that they, as a child, is being neglected. They could be in a home where they are witnessing domestic violence or substance misuse. It could be that the child is maybe a young carer, or they could have experienced something traumatic, for example, surviving an illness or an accident, or have suffered any form of bereavement. So ACEs is great at telling us the prevalence of trauma in our society. But what we must do as staff and as teachers is to understand that with kinder interactions, then our children who may have suffered from adverse childhood experiences can become resilient and then learn to trust the adults. So we're going to watch a video from the UK Trauma Council. This is called Childhood Trauma and the Brain, and it discusses the term of latent vulnerability.
Brain development is much more than a story about biology. From the earliest years, relationships with others play a key role in shaping how our brain grows and develops. Early relationships, where there is abuse and neglect, have a long-term impact on children. A brain that has adapted to survive in a threatening or unpredictable world may not work so well in an ordinary environment. This can create what is called latent vulnerability, where early abusive or neglectful experiences with carers put children at greater risk of experiencing mental health problems in the future. For these children, compared to their peers, common experiences like moving to a new school can feel more daunting and stressful. New faces can appear threatening, while positive social cues can be missed. It can be harder to negotiate new social situations and learn to trust new people. Even fun experiences like joining a new sports team can be challenging. Too much focus on potential threat cues can mean missing out on positive social cues such as a playful nudge. Or it causes an overreaction, which leads to an increased risk of conflict and sometimes violence. These reactions can increase the likelihood of generating new stressful events. It's harder to deal with everyday challenges when you feel unconfident and anxious inside, and harder to build and maintain relationships. Over time, this can mean a child loses friends and the support of adults, and so misses out on opportunities to grow and develop. This social thinning can increase the risk of mental health problems in the future. Neuroscience research is beginning to shed new light on how vulnerability unfolds over a child's life. All children need care and stimulation from adults who value them and who show them attention and love. These experiences shape a child's brain development. When children face traumatic experiences like abuse and neglect, their brain adapts to help them cope. We know of changes in 3 different brain systems: the reward, memory, and threat systems. Experiences of domestic violence or physical abuse can lead to hypervigilance, where the brain reacts more to threat. This might help a child stay safe in an early adverse environment, but it can cause problems in more ordinary environments. Hypervigilance can best be understood as a pattern of adaptation rather than a sign of damage. Abuse and neglect can also mean a world where a child's basic needs for care and attention are not met. This can shape the brain's reward system, the part of the brain that helps us learn about positive aspects of our environment and motivates our behaviour. Over time, the brain's reward system can learn to respond differently to things like positive social cues. Neuroscience studies have also pointed to changes in the autobiographical memory system, our memory of everyday past experiences. Following trauma, negative memories appear to become more salient, which means they become more prominent than positive ones. And everyday memories can also become less detailed. This is a problem because we need to draw on past experiences to help us deal with new social situations. Neuroscience research is showing how childhood trauma can create latent vulnerability, increasing the risk of later mental health problems like anxiety and depression. This vulnerability is not just located in the child, but arises through their relationships. Helping children who have experienced trauma still requires ordinary boundaries and consequences, but it also requires us to step back and reflect and see behaviour that we find challenging in a different light. A child may simply be doing their best to survive now, with brain adaptations from the past. We know a child's brain has the capacity to continue to adapt. For this to happen, they need our help to build and maintain trusted relationships, manage everyday stresses, and prevent new ones from happening. We need to encourage them to try again and believe things can be different. This is far from an easy task and takes time. Science is helping reframe our understanding of childhood trauma. Seeing children's behaviour in a new light can mean we respond differently. But there is much still to learn. Working together, we can develop more effective approaches that promote resilience and recovery. We can help children build trusting relationships and create opportunities for their brains to adapt in new ways.
So how do we become a trauma-informed school? Understanding trauma means that we all need to change our responses to children. This is from the governors to the receptionists to the support staff, the head teachers, the caretakers, the mealtime supervisors. Everyone involved in your school needs to think about how we respond to our children, and we all need to have that understanding of trauma. Being trauma informed is a kinder approach. It is based on relationship, so building that relationship with the children. If you are getting it right for children who struggle to regulate, then you are getting it right for everyone. Implementing a trauma-informed approach will benefit everyone in your setting. So we're going to think about how we work to rebuild the capacity for pupils to respond with their human learning brain. Once again, this needs to be an approach for the whole school or your setting, to make sure that all staff are working together with their new understanding of how attachment disorder and trauma and associated stress can change the way that the brain responds, and therefore how pupils behave in certain situations. It's important to recognise that this may result in changes in behaviour policy or other policies, and it will certainly need changes in how the school or your setting respond to pupils with these needs. The ARC framework, which stands for Attachment Regulation Competency. This is a framework that can provide a way of working with pupils that may have experienced attachment and trauma. This framework helps to rebuild their capacity for children to be able to respond with their learning brain. So firstly, we start at the bottom where we need to build that attachment with the child. So work at the attachment level is needed to calm the brainstem, which is the oldest part of the brain and sometimes called the reptilian brain. This then can make the pupil form an attachment relationship with the staff member that are there to help them, making them feel very safe. Next, we need to look at naming the emotions. So we're going to start teaching our children what emotions are, what emotions they may be showing us. We need to start helping the children recognise the emotions that they are experiencing, so they can be helped to identify what they are feeling, and then they can notice how those feelings show in their bodies. Only then can they have a chance to develop ways to regulate those feelings so that they are not becoming so overwhelming and stopping their thinking brain from working. Once we begin to name those emotions, then we need to start teaching children how to tame them. We need to start teaching them where they are feeling this in their body and how we can support them to become calm again. So we need to teach them the regulating skills. Once children are able to sort of name and tame their emotions, then they will be able to develop their thinking brain because they will be much calmer. Now, the thinking brain is used for everything in terms of learning how their skills for organisation, for problem solving and learning. It helps them with expressing and sharing emotions to others, and also understanding how we relate to others. Now, we ask our children to tap into their thinking brain all day, every day in our settings. So it's really, really important that pupils are able to tap into that thinking brain because we are helping them to feel calm. So it's really important to remember that pupils may manage to use their thinking brain okay on occasion, but seemingly out of nowhere, feelings will trigger responses that mean the adults around them need to go back to working at the level of attachment for a while until the pupil feels safe enough to calm their reptilian brain. Those sorts of responses could be triggered by anything from a noise that might trigger a bad memory for them, maybe a smell of perfume. So it's just important to remember that children may experience those triggers, and we may need to go back to the start and making sure that we are there to support that child's anxiety and how we are going to manage the emotions together. So a trauma-informed approach asks what happened to you, not what is wrong with you. Now, this is not a literal question to ask children, but what we want to be doing in our settings is we want to develop that curiosity. We want you to become the detective, okay? We want to make sure that everyone is changing the question in their head from what is the matter with you to what happened to you. How does the child respond? What behaviour are you seeing from the pupil? Does it make sense if you know their experiences? So if we're thinking about a child that may have experienced attachment and trauma, we need to start thinking about what happened to you and the reasons why we are seeing the responses and the behaviour. And then we need to support. So what would happen if you were to become curious about the behaviour? So you might consider how the pupil is communicating their feelings, wants and needs. You might try to understand the context. So what were the situations, the relationships, the dynamics that led to the reactions that you maybe saw from the child in your setting? What behaviours were they showing? Were there any triggers? Is there a particular pattern to the behaviours that you are seeing? You could explore and try to make sense of what you see. What is the purpose of the behaviour? How does it make sense? Is the behaviour helping that child interact? Maybe they don't know how to interact with another child because they've not had those experiences. So what is the purpose of the behaviour? You might notice how changes, however subtle, in how the behaviour communicates feelings or needs. You could seek out positive messages. So always look for ways to share that you have noticed the good behaviour first before anything else. So there are ways in our settings that we can become more curious. It's important for us as staff to take time to reflect on what you see in your setting. Can there be somebody that sits back and maybe observes the child to see if there is any pattern to the behaviour, to see what the behaviour is communicating to us? Because remember that behaviour is always a communication, and it's our job to become very curious and become a detective to try and find out what that child needs in that moment. Once again, it's really important that everyone is understanding, everyone who is working with that child has an understanding of the impact of the trauma and attachment difficulties that child might be experiencing. If everyone can see the child's behaviour through that trauma lens, it will help the responses to be appropriate and consistent. Having those positive messages for that child, noticing, even the small positives, can really help with that praise reinforcement. It might be that you give them a job to do every day. It's their job, so it helps with that consistency, and it also gives that reason for praise, helping that child to have that strong self-esteem, which can really help a child who may have experienced attachment and trauma and maybe not have had those positive experiences in their early years. So we need to prioritise safety to reduce the anxiety. Remembering that routines are important for traumatised children. They provide that feeling of safety and predictability. We need an environment that provides safety and predictability so that it reduces the need for children to be rigid and over-controlling. Limits may have been associated with powerlessness and vulnerability. Children may be reactive to and triggered by limits and praise. Systems that generate feelings of shame can trigger those unwanted responses. So let's think, if you were in the staff room and somebody was to become upset and kick the table, how might you handle that situation? So what helps a pupil feel safe in a school or an early years setting will be different for each pupil. And it's really important to have that flexibility within your systems and processes. It's essential to respond to pupils who may be overwhelmed, causing them to respond in unhelpful ways. What we need to be doing is demonstrating and enacting those routines consistently, which will be far more helpful than enforcing the routines. So we're going to look at using relational techniques, so techniques that are in the moment. So if relationships are where it's gone wrong, it is through the rebuilding of relationships where we can always put things right. Some of these techniques that work in our early years settings is making sure that that child has a trusted adult. So really building that trust with that child can really help that child feel much calmer, feel safe and secure, and then we're less likely to see those behaviours. If we talk about PACE, which is playfulness, acceptance, curiosity and empathy, this is a way of managing a distressed or dysregulated child. You can find further information around this model in Let's Learn Together, which is on the Adoption UK and on the Virtual Schools website. We of course have already discussed the ARC framework, and that is another relational technique. Connection before correction, so re-establishing that relationship with that child, especially if they have shown those behaviours. It's really important to reassure that you still like the pupil, that you reconnect, that you have shown forgiveness. We don't want to be showing blame or making that child feel blame, feel that they are being blamed for something that they actually probably couldn't help but do. So it's really important to make sure that we reconnect with that child after an incident. Once pupils feel safe in the attached relationship, then we can start to talk about what has happened and support the pupils and staff to, repair those relationships. When we talk about de-escalation, this can be really useful in some situations. So we have our de-escalation scripts. It could just be that we are saying, I am here to help. Making sure we have discussed name it to tame it. There is a video as well if you want to look up Dan Siegel. There's some more information around name it to tame it. So that's all around naming those emotions and then teaching those children the emotions and what they can do when they are feeling that emotion. Making sure that the child is kept in mind. So demonstrate that the pupil is being kept in mind even when not physically present. So maybe remembering that they were going to see their nan at the weekend and having a conversation with it on the Monday morning. Or maybe remembering their favourite football team or their favourite cartoon programme. Being kept in mind and can really help that child feel secure and safe in their setting, and it shows that you're building that trusting relationship. Sometimes offering an object, so where a pupil can maybe look after something from you for you as well, can really help that with that being kept in mind. And then if we're being curious, we go back to that being curious, go back to being that detective, you know, making sure that we're saying, I wonder, okay, I wonder if you were feeling a little bit scared about climbing up the slide. Sometimes being curious and being that detective and trying to start that very simple conversation with what our young children can help them feel listened to and understood. And then you can support them with those emotions, and they can start to learn those emotions and when they are feeling it. So we're going to look at some approaches that you can try in your setting. So having that key adult or a couple of adults check in several times in the day. We need to make sure that that key adult is accessible to the pupil in a safe place at a regular time. Can it be scheduled in to the child's day where they're having that one-to-one special time to really build that attachment with a couple of adults in the setting, which will help the child feel much safer in their environment. We need to notice, we need to connect, and we need to respond. We need to make sure that we are really noticing those positives, no matter how small, from our children. We need to provide that regular time for the key adults to support the pupil to understand and be aware of those internal experiences, such as how their feelings affect their physical body. If that key adult really spends a lot of time with the child, they're going to really understand any small sign that that child might be showing where they are beginning to feel anxious or cross or sad. It could be any sign from a fidget. It could be that the child is beginning to maybe become a little bit more active, or maybe becoming a little bit more shy, so they're internalizing their feelings. But if that child has those key adults, then and they spend time with each other, then the key adults will really understand those feelings and how they affect the physical body. With this, they are then able to control or adjust their physical feelings. So the child may be able to share with their key adult how they are feeling, or communicate in some way that actually they may need some help. Traumatic stress overwhelms limited coping skills automatically. So it either forces the child to disconnect from their feelings or to use unhealthy coping skills responses. We could be providing a safe space for that child to reflect and to regulate. It might be that they need that safe space to escape and just have some time to calm down, during their day. The safe space should be theirs, so it's important for other children around to also know and understand that actually this is this child's safe space, to be able to use sort of throughout the day as and when needed. If we're looking at whole body interventions, then these are known to reduce the anxiety and manage the levels of stress, making it much more likely that the human brain can respond the way we would like it to. Now, if we imagine a child who is not able to manage that stress due to the attachment and trauma experiences that they have had, if we think of it like a glass of water, and that the anxiety is filling the glass with loads of water, so our that glass is nearly full. Imagine that's in our brain, and our brain is becoming flooded with that water, with that anxiety. How can we then expect a child to respond appropriately if their whole brain is flooded with anxiety and stress? Going back to the glass of water, if it was completely full and we added one more drop of water, so one more bit of anxiety, stress or demand, then it's very likely that that glass of water will overflow. And that's the same as our brains. If we are completely stressed and something extra is put inside of our brains, then the likelihood is that we will explode, and we will see that through the behaviours. So we need to start thinking about those whole body interventions where we're trying to empty the water out. So we need to make sure that we are doing some physical activities. It might be that you do the daily mile in your setting. It might be that a child can access sensory circuits, or it might be that they have some time in a quiet room. They might have a sensory diet. They might have fidget toys, music, mindfulness, relaxation time. What does that child like? It's really important to know and understand what calms that child. Painting, drawing, messy play. Is it just time with that key adult that actually will manage to empty the water out? If we are able to help that child with, emptying their water out, making their brain less overwhelmed, then they are more likely to have the space to be able to engage with their human brain. When the human brain is working, we can then teach pupils about their brain. We can help them understand why they respond in those particular ways, and we can give them other strategies in order to manage those responses. Remembering our early years children, we might have to do that as adults. We need to understand when they are becoming overwhelmed, and then we need to make sure that we are managing those responses. We need to be putting in those preventative strategies, noticing those triggers, and helping support those help support the children in becoming more regulated. Of course, we need to really remember to look after ourselves and each other. So the expectation that we can be immersed in suffering and loss daily and not touched by it is as realistic as expecting to be able to walk through water without getting wet. Now, we have a hard job in our settings, and it is a hard job, and it takes a long time. So what we need to remember is that we need to offer support to each other. Are you having regular supervisions in your setting? Do you have a peer group, maybe, where staff have the time to support each other? If you don't, could you maybe set one up? It's also important to remember that there are some apps as well. So they are supportive apps. So there is one called the Hub of Hope, or Calm, and they can help you personally if you would like to locate any support that they have to offer. Pupils who have brains wired to react in a certain way because of their experiences need that time and understanding. They need the skills from us as adults. They need consistency and patience from all of us around them to repair the damage, and to see that changed response. We may need to change the way that we have previously responded to pupil behaviour and work against preconceived ideas. It is hard to change behaviour, even for us, but it is definitely worth it. To support others, we also need to be supported ourselves. It's important to remember that actually, when we are working and supporting children who have experience those adverse childhood experiences, it can sometimes lead to secondary trauma, and then we can respond in unhelpful ways for the pupils that we are supporting. So just really take that time to look after yourself and look after each other in your settings. So I want you just to take a moment here, and think about self-care. Maybe do an activity in pairs if you're watching with a few people in your setting. What do you do to take care of yourself? So do you do something before entering a situation? Do you do that mental rehearsal or any sort of relaxation? Do you do any in the moment things such as deep breathing? If we're thinking about recovery, do you reach out? Do you do any activities that maybe, that's your self-care routine? Do you go to the gym or go for a run? I also want you to think about, try and remember one good thing that has happened to you today, and maybe share that with the person, with somebody that you're with on this training. What do you think you need to do more of in your settings and personally? So do you have regular debriefs? Do you have supervisions after difficult incidents? Are you allowed to take some time after a particularly difficult incident? What could you do more of in your setting? Who can you talk to about that? Do you have plans in place for the children? So what do you do for the children in your settings? And how does that help you? Do you have a plan for yourself if you maybe have had a difficult incident and you do need some time? So just pause the slide and take a couple of minutes, or just to maybe to discuss self-care, and what you do for yourself and in your setting. So working towards attachment aware schooling. Do you have a whole school setting culture of emotional literacy and relationship-based teaching and learning? What resources do you use? What programs do you use to embed that culture of emotional literacy, that children are really learning all about emotional literacy? Are you playing mirror games where they are exploring their faces of their emotions. So looking in the mirror and showing a happy face or an angry face. Could you play peekaboo games where, you know, you're hiding your face and then peekaboo and I've got a happy face or a sad face? So really exposing your children to the emotions and having that understanding of emotional literacy and relationship-based teaching and learning. Having a flexible application of a differentiated behaviour policy. You know, have a look at your behaviour policy. Does it have anything around the attachment and trauma aware? What can you take from this training that you might change, you know, might put in your behaviour policy? Does anything need to be changed in your behaviour policy in terms of how you support children who may have attachment and trauma? You know, are you putting in your behaviour policy that you know, are having that relationship-based teaching and learning, that you want to build that strong attachment with all children in your setting? When we're talking about behaviour management, do you use rewards and sanction system? Thinking about those feelings that a child may experience from being sanctioned. You know, they may experience that individual shame. So are you focusing on reducing the anxiety and moving towards building those relationships rather than trying to make a child do as they are told? So how are we meeting that child's needs in order for them to build those relationships? Some of you may have embedded nurture principles, so you might be using nurture groups in your setting, or mindfulness. So, you know, having those relationship-based principles embedded throughout your school setting. Are you making sure that there is well-being for staff? So is there regular supervisions that is obviously very useful for managing the impact of working with traumatised children? What we want to do in our schools is nurture a culture where help can be sought and given without judgment, for children and for staff. We don't want to give any judgments. Who is a risk of blocked care? So when we're talking about that blocked care, maybe the effects of secondary trauma, maybe, you know, what we've got to think about is there anyone in your setting that may not be able to see the child through the behaviour? So maybe we are seeing somebody who is noticing everything negative about that child. Maybe they are using negative language about the child. So, you know, we need to really start teaching all staff that we need to focus on the positives of that child, and actually really talking positively about that child in our setting. It's really important to have those systems of support for all staff in order to manage and cope with their own emotional responses. And it's important for all staff to respond appropriately and not react. So we're going to watch a video called Don't Label Me.
I wasn't born angry, but I learned to be angry. I wasn't born a vandal, but I smashed up my classroom. I wasn't born rude, but I told my teacher to piss off.
I wasn't born silent, but I learned to keep my mouth shut. I wasn't born invisible, but I didn't want to be seen. I wasn't born anxious, but everything was frightening.
I wasn't born a liar, but I learnt how to lie. I wasn't born a show-off,
but I needed to get attention. I wasn't born a doormat, but I'd do anything to help.
I was lucky. At school,
at college,
in the infants, I had a teacher
a teacher
who listened,
who understood.
who made a difference.
I feel that's a really powerful video. This is why we get into, teaching, supporting children. We want to be that teacher that makes a difference, that child remembers, that child can talk to and can trust. So I feel that this video is a really powerful video for everyone to watch. So I just want you to take a moment, maybe pause the slide, and just think, if you were a child, how might you notice that you are a trauma-aware school? So what do you have in place already? Do you have key workers? Do you have that set time with a child? Are you already doing those relationship-based learning and teaching? So just take a few minutes and just either discuss with the person or the people that you are maybe watching the video with, or just take a few minutes to think about this and jot down some ideas. What do you notice in your school? So what we should aim for, okay? What we want to aim for in our schools and settings is a decrease in sanctions such as timeouts. We want to see a decrease in suspensions and reduced timetables. Obviously, we want to see a decrease in challenging behaviour. We want to see an increase in those relational approaches. We want to see engagement, focus. We want to see better attendance with our children. We want to see children achieving, and we want to see positive emotional well-being. Now, take another few minutes, and what else do you think that you would like in your setting? What would you want to see decreased in your setting and increased in your setting? So take a few minutes, pause the training and discuss with each other about what you'd like to see in your setting. Just a nice slide that just is stating that every interaction is an intervention, and that's what we want to see in our settings. So as next steps, what can you do for next steps? So what attachment aware practices are already in place in your school? How else might your school adapt to support the full spectrum of needs of all of your children? How will you ensure it is a whole school approach for trauma-aware responses? We want this training to be part of your induction process. So making sure that all staff in your setting are watching both part 1 and part 2 of the training, and really beginning to have that understanding of being attachment and trauma aware. So do you anticipate any resistance, and if so, how will you overcome it? How will you do things differently following this training? What are your next steps? So in part 1 of the training, my colleague Denise Filer asked you to complete an activity, the 4 corners activity. So if you have a look at the first task paper, and on the back of the paper, I want you to now do the following. So I want you to write down 4 things that you will do differently. 1 thing should be what you want to do differently for the children that you work with. 1 thing that you would like to change in your school. 1 thing you would take away to share with colleagues, and 1 change you will make to your approach. So of course, there are further strategies and supports to consider, and here is a slide with links to Hertfordshire Steps, information around nurture groups, therapeutic approaches such as play therapy, music therapy, art therapy. So feel free to go through these links. It's also, I just wanted to add that we do also have our therapeutic approaches to behaviour training, which runs 3 times a year, and it is developed with the principles of STEPS and in conjunction with Virtual Schools Hertfordshire, and it's focused on our early years children. So you can find details of that training through either myself, Hannah Fife, or Denise Filer, and we can share the details with you. So on your Virtual Schools website, the link is here. Once you have completed the training, then you can click on the link or go onto the Virtual School website, and you can also claim your certificates for completing the training. And just to end this training with a quote. So students who are loved at home come to school to learn, and students who aren't come to school to be loved. Thank you very much for watching. I hope you enjoyed the training, and I hope you found it useful.